Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is MsNoBuntu, DIVAA, Divinely Inspired, Vibrantly Anointed Artist. And I am back again with another sharing of thoughts and insights on Iyanla Fix My Life's Healing Process Season 8, Episode 6. This episode almost took me out. It was so painful and it hit a chord and a nerve so deep in my life and within myself that I didn't think I was going to make it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to summarize what happened in the episode in this first video, and then 2 consecutive videos after this, part 2 and part 3. I will go into deeper detail on parts and points that I will choose to go into deeper detail about. I will try to keep it as chronological as possible. So if you are looking for the other parts, look down below in the comment section. I will pin the other parts as the first comment, as well as insert them in the description box down below. I want to say thank you to all who have recently subscribed. I see you. I see the numbers are changing in the region of upwards. And so I just want to thank you for supporting this channel and the growth of this channel. Please like, please share, so more people see this content that you enjoy and come on over and watch and share as well and become subscribers just like you. Without further ado, let me get into what this Season 8, Episode 6 episode was about. So this episode is about 2 sons and a father. The mother died. And so it's about the aftermath of the unraveling that happens when the heart of the family, usually the mother, the soul of the family, usually the mother, dies. And the kind of dynamics that unravel when the mother dies. So you have this father who has 2 young sons. There's one who's 20 and there's one who's 16. The 20-year-old is adopted, Lawrence, and the youngest, what's his name, David Jr., is about 16. And what happened is that, you know, the mother was diagnosed with cancer. She passed away, and the sons have been acting out ever since, because the mother was a disciplinarian, was a drill sergeant in the house. And so as soon as that role was gone, all heck broke loose in the family dynamic. So starting with the dad, who is David Sr., his major thing is that, you know, he is this father who doesn't know what to do with children, because that was never his role. He was more the passive parent. He was probably, you know how dads are. They provide, but they're not necessarily present emotionally for their children. And then when the mother dies, they don't know what to do with this role of parenting. So this dad it's 4 years later after the spouse's passing on, and still in a lot of grief, very heartbroken man. And you know what comes up is how angry he is at God, and how he won't really admit, he hasn't been able to really admit that, and how that will help him, you know. And when Iyanla said this to him, that just, you know, have you even gotten to this point where you let God know how angry you are at him? And then he speaks it out eventually, and he starts to weep. You know, he starts to talk about, I do all this work. He's also a pastor, so he's an educator and a pastor. I do all this work to encourage, to inspire people, and this is what I get for my reward. And he's really mad at God about that, and it's understandable. I'm really grateful to this family for allowing this illustration to happen, using their family, and for us to then search for ourselves and locate ourselves in the story, and where things apply to us, we can apply. Where things are speaking to our situations directly, then we can take the tools that are being provided to alleviate our issues that we're having and that are going on in our own lives. So that's the first thing that happened that just really got me. And then the second thing was you know, there's this illustration that is with these two sons. They are going back wild, you know. They haven't really had this opportunity to express grief in a constructive way or in a safe way, in a way that's not self-destructive. And Iyanla brings to them this reality of, listen, in America, there is a path that is carved out for a brown man. For a man of color, the system has already carved out a path for you, and it's from the desk to the cage. And there's a pipeline that exists between that, of how many offenses you have that then lead you to the cage from your education. And the further away you get from your education, the closer you get to the cage. And so in the first segment, you know, Iyanla talks to the dad to say, where do you think each son is on this track towards being incarcerated? And for the oldest son, who is 20 years old, Lawrence, he says about 3 years. And for the youngest son, who is David Jr., who is his biological son, he says about 3 to 6 months. And so obviously this is a state of emergency for the family as to, and what are you going to do? Are you going to remain not present because you are heartbroken and drop the ball on actually raising your children and calling them higher and giving them boundaries and giving them accountability? Or are you just going to drop the ball and make the excuse that, well, I was in pain, I was brokenhearted? And I think, you know, what's interesting about this is that when this kind of thing happens is that, you know, I would say fathers focus on, I've lost the love of my life, I've lost my best friend. But guess what? The children have lost their mother. They stewed in her amniotic fluid inside her body for 9 to 10 months. they literally lost a limb, just like a father has lost a limb, a very integral part of who they are. The children have also lost a very integral part of who they are. So no one's pain is more important than the other person's pain, that the one should get to sit it out. The one who's the parent and needs to continue the work of parenting can sit it out, and then the children get to run wild and not get any kind of guidance. So that's what came up with this dad, is that he's kind of dropped the ball when it comes to, you know, raising his sons, because that was always his wife's role, because she was the disciplinarian and the drill sergeant, as they call her, and as they refer to her discipline style. So the first son comes in and talks, you know, about different things, about, you know, how he's gone off the rails. And what happened is that, you know, the mother dies, he goes to the streets, starts, you know, doing street thugging, street things. I don't know what street things are, but starts doing street things, and you know, buying drugs and selling drugs. And then what happened that kind of reeled him back in slightly is that he got shot 50 times. His car got shot 50 times. Some people that were in the car with him got shot, but he didn't get shot. So he survived. And he tells Iyanla that also that his girlfriend is pregnant, and there's a baby on the way. The dad doesn't know that. No one knows this. Let me just mention also that Iyanla invited Dr. Perry to be there, because this was a story that involved men. And I like that she's very careful to not put men in a position where they are going through this kind of process being led by a woman, but that there is a man there to work with the woman, Iyanla, to lead these men in the process, so they don't feel like, why am I in a healing process and the woman is leading me? Those things are somewhat important, and they have a bearing on how people respond to the process, whether you want to admit it or not. And I like that Iyanla is aware of that bearing that they have, and every time that there is a man involved, he then brings on Dr. Perry to be with her and to work in the same capacity as her, to get into the men's hearts through man talk, you know. So they have this conversation that, you know, he's also about to have a child, and that what's also missing from here for him is that he didn't finish high school, and now he wants to go back to finish high school, and basically on that pipeline towards the cage. If finishing high school is like one step back away from that, from that destination of being locked up, and then doing something even more responsible and more responsible and more responsible gets him out of that tunnel altogether, and he could save his life. And same applies to his younger brother. The final, you know, in the conversation that he has with Dr. Perry, Dr. Perry kind of establishes a sense of accountability for them, for both sons, because obviously there isn't any discipline, there isn't any accountability, and the discipline style of the dad is that if he feels uncomfortable attending to something or approaching something or dealing with something, he pretty much pretends as if it's not there, and he doesn't deal with it. If his discomfort about dealing with it is more important to him about the discomfort of dealing with it and nipping things in the bud. Again, a very common thing that happens with fathers that are left with children when the mother has died. They'll take all kinds of discomfort from the children being in pain, and they will become permissive parents and drop the ball and loosen the reins, because they can't take seeing you being in pain. But in the process of doing that, they're setting you up for failure. They're setting you up for something else worse than continuing to confront you, continuing to hold you accountable, continue to parent you, continue to give you structure and boundaries. So what Dr. Perry does with the eldest son is that he says, well, okay, if you have a baby on the way, that means that you need to get a job, and you say you also want to complete school. So there's two things you need to do. You need to register for a civil servants test or application process, and also you need to find a study guide for this final year that you want to attend to and finish, and I want this done by tomorrow. And that's where the conversation ends. He gives him something to do, and his expectation is that it should be done by tomorrow. This is basically setting up appointment for the civil servants test and finding a study guide. The youngest one comes in as well, explains his situation, you know, he's in the streets, rolling with the wrong crowd. He's a follower more than a leader. And, you know, Dr. Perry says, look, there's nothing wrong with being a follower as long as you're following the right crowd, the correct crowd of people that are lifting you up as opposed to pulling you down. And for both of them, the question that Dr. Perry and both Iyanla, but particularly Dr. Perry, has is, how is it that you both grew up middle class? Your mom was a nurse, your dad was a teacher, and you are doing things as if you grew up in the hood. You did not grow up in the ghetto. You grew up in middle class life. But what you're going for is hood things. And, you know, the young son explains that, you know, that it was exciting initially, but then he started running into trouble here and then. People in his circle of the incorrect and wrong crowd started dying out. And then that was a kind of a wake-up call for him. But because he's a follower, he probably doesn't even know how to get out of that. And so Dr. Perry has a conversation with him, and again gives him a responsibility about two things as well to hold him accountable for, and expectations to be, you know, achieved by the next day. Says, okay, I need you to call your teacher, send an email, talk about how you've been slacking in your work, and how you're going to make it up. And I will also send a letter to verify that you are here in this Iyanla Fix My Life healing process, and that's why you're partly experiencing delay. The other thing was that he had to wake himself up at 7 o'clock a.m. the next day and attend to his schoolwork before sending that email. And so that was that conversation. And he started out saying he's about, he was asked, where are you in this pipeline? Where do you think you are? And he said at 3 years. And literally Dr. Perry walks in and looks at this man, at this young man, this 60-year-old, and says, let's get real, brother. For real, where are you? And he gets up and he puts it at 3 to 6 months. And he's like, okay, let's tell some truths. And yeah, and so what happens after that? The next day, suddenly, Lawrence, the older brother, shows up and he's sick. Iyanla goes to see about him and is like, did you do the 2 things that Dr. Perry asked you to do? He's like, oh, I'm so sick. I'm so sick. And he hasn't done any of the things that he was expected to do. And then he's sent over to the hospital. Whereas David Jr., the youngest brother, has done everything that he was supposed to do. So the process continues with him. And Iyanla says to the dad, do you believe him? Lawrence, the older brother. And the dad's like, well, it's kind of dilly-dallying about, actually, I don't believe him. And so there's that. And then, but I'll get into more detail in the next part. And then what happens is that the process, because Iyanla doesn't believe that Lawrence, the older brother, is telling the truth, he says, I don't believe that he's being truthful. I've seen this before from my own grandchildren. I don't believe he's telling the truth. And if he's not showing up being truthful in this process, I'm not willing to, then this process ends here for him. I'm not willing to continue the process with him if he's going to lie in the process. So the process continues with the aunt of the 2 sons and the sister of the dad and the dad, and it continues with David Jr. And some things are found out about the dynamic between David Jr. and Lawrence, his adopted older brother, in this second part that just really, this second half from day 2, it almost took me out. But I don't want this to be long because I want to go into detail more in the next video that I have for you. So please stay tuned for that. But to sum it up, I will say that the process continues with David Jr. and David Sr. And the aunt is there, just as a support system. And it continues, and David Jr. is just responding to the whole thing and is really responding well. And I just feel like this young man just needed somebody to hear him and to not dismiss him, and to see him and to not dismiss him, and to validate his insights about his older brother, and just his insights about, when you're young and you be knowing and your parents dismiss you because you're young, how you be knowing? Because it's a gift, you be knowing. I believe David Jr. is one of those kids who be knowing and who be seeing, and it gets dismissed a lot, and that can create a lot of angst when you are not taken seriously, yet you're always right. And even though you're always right, you also don't have the space to say, told you so, So this process, to sum it up in the second half, finishes up, and it's looking good by the end of the day, by the end of the process. And the father has had a reality check about his older son, that his older son is manipulative and plays him. And he keeps taking his older son's side against the younger son. But actually the manipulative person is the older son. The person who's hustling and playing the hustle and playing the games is the older son. And these are things that he has to speak some truths about and grapple with within himself about how to go forward, creating expectations and accountability and boundaries for both his sons, but particularly his older son. And there are things that Iyanla prescribes for the younger son and prescribes for the dad as well, to go into in beginning to build themselves back up from the brokenness, from the broken pieces. So that is about it. I would say the overall, you know, roundup of what happened in this episode. This episode nearly took me out. I'm still in a lot of pain. But I will go into greater detail tomorrow. And I think I'll just take my time, because I'm not a reviewer. I'm not trying to get the first review out before everybody else. I just care to go in depth with whatever insights and epiphanies and thoughts that I would like to share. If you have any thoughts and insights as well, please feel free to share them with me down in the comments section. I want to hear from you, and I want to hear what your thoughts are and how this impacted you, because this deeply impacted me, this episode. It's interesting that Iyanla says that it was a letter to all Black men, and I was like, no, this was a letter to me. It was a letter to this young Black girl. And it's so interesting that she thought she wrote it as a letter to Black men, but this episode was for me. So I will see you in the second and third part of this episode. Thank you again for tuning in. Bye.